So the next speaker we've got today is John Kerr from Flight Structures. So John is the founder, CEO and Chief Designer for Flight Structures Limited, Chief Design Engineer at NZ Skydive, formerly Pacific Aerospace, and a CAA NZ Design Delegation Holder. He has over 30 years in the aircraft industry. The first 12 years were variously at Pacific Aerospace, Space Minister Group, Intech and Aerostructures, shifting between New Zealand, the UK and Australia. In 2003 he started Flight Structures in Hamilton, where he's remained ever since. John lists his engineering specialties as design and certification of FAR 23 aircraft, helicopter emergency services equipment, power plant installations, agricultural aircraft, and more recently, automated flight. So if you can welcome John, please.
Good morning to everybody. John Kerr, Flight Structures. And the topic is... Uh, 750XL2 type certification. It's also known, it's colloquially known as the Super Pack. So we're just, it's really a bit of a talk about what that process was like, sort of possibly at the the very back end of the whole program. Your certification is sort of what happens at the very end of it all. So now, first of all, like a bit of a note from our sponsor, it's a bit of a favourite topic of mine. On the very rare occasion where compliance and safety sort of come into a bit of conflict. This particular one that we're looking at is a bit of a hobby horse of mine. So we've got a helicopter up in Auckland. We think it's got ergonomically the best fit out for any sort of emergency services work up in the Auckland Rescue Trust. They're very, very big on clinical care inside the helicopter. So they will actually be prepping the patient as they bring them into the hospital, as they call them, pre-hospital work. The only thing they can't do at the moment is the CAT scan. But everything else that would normally happen in your emergency department, they do on board the helicopter. And what's just about going to make it perfect is if they can get themselves a swivelly seat. So on the left-hand side, there's our guy. He's sort of reaching behind, getting access to his drugs, and he's nicely strapped into his seat. He's safe against moving about. And then on the bottom picture, he's looking after that patient who's, hanging on there, not quite dead, but because of his great emergency skills and the swivelly seat, the doctor's able to look after him. So that's what we think safe, and safe in its very broadest sense, as life and death. Here is a patient who's actually in life and death. Now on the right-hand side, we have the compliant setup, where the doctor has to leap up out of the seat, take off his harness, delve on the back to get the life-saving drugs, and you can see on the expression of his face, it's very hard to reach across and try and arrest the bleeding or restart the heart, or whatever he's doing there. So I've been sort of plugging away. Our little swivelly seat system up there at the moment is sort of stopped compliance-wise on a bit of a technicality, and actually most of the people I was pleading with have now left the CAA, so maybe I'll have another plug. So I'm sort of saying, hey CAA, let's find a way. So should have a bit more punch because it's got a rhyme. Anyway, back to the main topic, what we're here to talk about. So we have what's called the Super Pack. So Pratt & Whitney bought out a new power plant, the Dash 140A, which is really a evolution of the Dash 34 that went before it. So all the aircraft of that sort of type and size, the Air Tractors, the Cessna Caravans, the used to be the Quest Kodiak, they've all sort of upgraded to this engine. It's got more performance power capability in it, which means that you've got more sort of hot and hour performance, and it also sort of uses less fuel. So it's sort of really just a logical evolution of where things are going. On the front of that, Hartzell have got a four-bladed propeller they put on the front. I think it's arguably, the propellers was sort of arguably, and excuse the pun, revolutionary, because it's, for about 30 years, the standard propeller this size has been sort of like the paddle, the all-paddle type shape. They're now doing something quite clever on the tips there, and this particular propellers turned out to be super grippy. It's like having unbelievable tyres on your car that just will never skid, no matter how much power you put into them. So it's, in terms of the power plant upgrade, arguably the propeller was more of a step change. A couple of other changes that they made at the same time was they balanced the trim tab on the elevator down the back. That reduces pilot loads, just makes flying a bit nicer. And the flap system was reduced down to 30 degrees in landing because it just found it was all round better. So those two systems were sort of really product improvements, which just really sort of were a sensible thing to do. So from a design-wise, what's the whole point? That's what we're there for. So pre-2021, I think it was, 2016. This project was actually started by Pacific Aerospace, as I said, on the Super Pack. So over at Flight Structures on the other part of the airfield, I would see that aircraft take off, and I would wistfully look at it as it went away, and I thought, wow, that's a cool project. I wish I was on it, but I wasn't. And a lot of work was done by Pacific Aerospace and that design team there. And it was all initiated there, and a lot of what we're doing, we're really sitting on the shoulders of what work sort of went before us. Both in terms of a lot of the engineering was done. So at the bottom, in terms of did the majority of the work, I'm up here sort of saying, hey, we did it. Actually, what I'm saying is we didn't do it all. In fact, we only did the last bit of it. Looking around the room, Richard Andrews, Ty, I think you were there on that. Henry Dumbleton had some work on it. Dan Chadwick, if you were still here. Anybody else who was working on it? Anton, who's not here, he did. I think Dan Retief, he might have. No, okay, not Dan Retief. Everybody else is getting everyone else is getting a shout out. But yeah, there was a lot of work done. They churned through a lot of people, so it's almost that they sort of went and did a lot of work on it, and then I sort of turn up, or me and my team turn up to finish it off. And what finished off as Pacific Aerospace went into liquidation, sort of in the COVID era. So all of a sudden it came to a screaming halt, and everyone got sort of turfed out. And a new company called NZ Skydive Limited. They were NZ Skydive trading as Pacific Aerospace, and now NZ Skydive trading as NZ Aero. And that's I don't have that logo because that's only turned up within this last week. So New Zealand Skydive is a husband and wife team, and they bought it from the liquidators. So with Pacific Aerospace before being owned by a bit of a consortium of New Zealanders and a large Chinese company, it's now sort of mum and dad have sort of bought the company back. So they got down to about 10 staff. I made them a call and said, hey, do you need any help for your in your design office to see through? And they said, yes, you're now our design office. So that's where when we came on board. I actually did turn up with a really good pitch and a song and dance routine, and they said, no, we don't want to hear it from you, John. So that's how we got it. So this is hopefully my wordiest slide. In terms of the 750XL project, what the liquidators said, what the new owners believed, sort of what we are told is, look, there's some drawings, a lot of drawings have all been done, you need to check them. There's some reports, they just need the final check off. And there's might be a couple of flights you need to finish off. And we went, yep, okay. Then when we started work there, they said, yes, another thing, you have to do the flight manual, you have to do the flight its manual, the takeoff procedure needs work, the stall warning system is not satisfactory, it's run out of pitch trim, we need to fix that. There will be the audit flight testing, and perhaps a real bit of a biggie was the noise testing. So that was, okay, that's a little bit more than what we thought. And then for the actual company itself said, hey, yes, but just before you do that, before you even get onto that project, we need to get your design organisation certificate back. NZ Skydive was a new company, so it wasn't a continuation of Pacific Aerospace, it was a brand new company, so it was treated as such as you're a new company, so you have to sort of reprove yourselves. So 146 design organisation, 148 design organisation, a real biggie. They said also, something else, you've got to finish the TC amendment for the latest glass cockpit version, which wasn't quite finished. So if you could just polish it off, that'd be good. Plus you've got to do production support, you've got fleet support. Oh, by the way, we don't have a test aircraft, so we need to make one of those. And we need to get a new test pilot sort of embedded. So the three items have got little squares around. I'm not going to rabbit on about every single one of them. But the three that have got squares around is what I was going to talk about in the following slides. So that particular aircraft, serial number 224, man, that was a pain in the neck. That was, it sort of had flap hysteresis, which we all know that's not good. It had its new, perhaps the easiest item in terms of certification was the new glass cockpit. That was about the most straightforward aspect of it. It turned out what was also wrapped into it was sort of with Pacific Aerospace that agreed that they'd wrap in all the modifications that had previously been going with every aircraft. So Pacific Aerospace would sell an aircraft as standard, and it would have like 150 modifications on it, with about 125 flight manual supplements and about 110 maintenance manual supplements. So the word was, hey, we want that all cleaned up. It's almost, in terms of the paperwork, it's almost unworkable. So we discovered with that aircraft it wasn't a simple approval of the actual design change, it was actually a little bit of a catch-up of 20 odd years of accumulated mods. In between times, the company that had owned the aircraft, they sort of said, well, they don't really want it anymore, so it sort of got bought back. And then bizarrely enough, with New Zealand now being the new company being New Zealand owned, the Australian Air Force said, hey, we quite like it. So that particular aircraft has gone to the Papua New Guinea Defence Force, funded by the Australian Defence Force. So anyway, we got that one through, type certificate amendment, November 2022. Here was Oh, this is quite a wordy one as well. So this is something which I consider a bit of a safety issue that sort of cropped up. It's to do with the aircraft, a little bit to do with that supergravity prop we talked about. The test pilot came to me and said, hey, this aircraft really takes off extremely quickly. In his words, it's very, very dynamic, and it's quite hot to handle. He also said you can't really apply the same takeoff procedure as what we do for the basic aircraft. For instance, you can't sit on the brakes and apply full power. In fact, he said you can actually probably have full brakes on, apply full power, and you'll probably take off. So he said it's just not really, it doesn't really work. He also said, look, the aircraft sort of flies when it flies, so don't try and hold the aircraft on the ground to get to your rotate speed. Get your rotate speed, do your rotation, but don't try and keep it on the ground, because if you actually try that, you end up, the aircraft's actually flying and you're effectively trying to force it. They had a couple of guys that were effectively wheelbarrowing down the runway. Another bit of a problem is that you have a V50 speed, which is it's fundamental, it comes out of the rules, which is a speed. You do your rotation, you select your V50 speed, and that's what you go through doing. You clear of objects. He said it happens so fast you can't ever see your speed. And also, if you do try and grab it, you're probably pulling back too back. So he said it's just too quick. Now we said, yep, okay, we take on board. That's not a pretend thing. That's not a you're talking about a technical compliance thing. He said, this is a real, you're close to the ground. This is stuff that's really happening, and it is a feature of this aircraft. And so we really need to do something about it. Now, interestingly, at our CAA audit, CAA's test pilot flew this aircraft and attempted to adopt the standard takeoff. And during the debrief, he said, we sort of thundered, he said that was unacceptable. We cannot use the old technique because it's completely unacceptable for the aircraft, with a pause for dramatic effect. And we said, yep, look, we agree, that's why we've come up with a new procedure. So our new takeoff procedure was, we really leant pretty heavily on the test pilot, and he said, well, how do you fly it? And he said, well, look, release the brakes fairly early on because it's going to start skidding either on, then smoothly advance your lever. He said if you're lightweight, you don't need to actually go to full power. It'll climb very happily on its own. So for everybody who's intimate with a super pack, you'll know that 40 psi actually means that's torque. 32 psi being your torque at lower speeds. So he said, look, just select your power, just very gently have a little bit of back pressure on the stick. The aircraft will sort of do its own thing, rotate at your rotate speed, and then just try and adopt about 12 degrees of pitch attitude. About 12 degrees. Get your horizon about the right space, look out the window, and you'll be there in no time. So that was the, for goodness sakes, don't be staring at the airspeed indicator, furiously trying to get an accurate speed and find yourself with very, very high deck angles or pitch angles or whatever. Make sure you're looking outside. And this is what we ended up putting actually in the flight manual. So we made it a little bit more sort of as what the test pilot mentioned. Again, you can see the control column, a little bit of light back pressure, and it all sort of happily moves on its way. You actually are still legally required to have your V50 speed, so we do still provide it, but we're saying, hey, sit at your 12 degrees pitch angle and you'll be about right. We were able to show two things that sort of leapt out from that was, oh my goodness, you've changed your procedure. What effects does that have on your takeoff distances that are published in your performance section? Because that could make them longer. And then the other talk is, but hang on, you've got the super grabby prop, and that might make takeoff distances a bit shorter. So we end up saying, well, I tell you what, we'll just leave them the same, and for planning purposes, we'll leave our takeoff distances, which quite frankly were already pretty short anyway, we'll just leave them as is. So that's what we ended up with. Everybody agreed that was a nicer way to take that aircraft off. Our 12 degrees, our 12 degree pitch angle seems to just, if you're looking out at the horizon and climbing that way, that just seemed to work very, very well. Now this is a compliance issue, noise, as opposed to a safety issue. No one's ever died in an aeroplane that's been too noisy that I'm aware of. Certainly not in the Part 23 sphere. I'm not sure if anyone has ever died when the aeroplane's flown overhead and they've considered it a bit noisy. But it is a compliance issue, and it is something that has to be addressed, and you just can't avoid it. Now the basic 750XL, the basic aircraft out there, meets the noise requirements. So they've done all that testing, they've got all the certificates and the qualification, and that gives you a pass. The Superpack 750XL2 is noticeably quieter, and it's quieter because the prop spins slower. So noise being dominated by tip speed. So the new aircraft is noticeably quieter. It's noticeably quieter just to the air. It's also noticeably quieter when we did a ground test and just sat there with our acoustic measurer. Notwithstanding that, you've got to do the full test. So I don't mention that because Pacific Aerospace before me and or before us and ourselves, we argued furiously saying, hey, if one's already okay and we're better than them, aren't we also okay? And the answer is nope. You've got to do a test, and that's I don't think it wasn't a CAA thing. It's more of an FAA thing. FAA says you test. We actually rang up a noise testing DER and said, hey, Mr. Noise Testing Expert DER, you're an expert on noise, aren't you? And he said, yes, I am. And we said, hey, here's our logic. We've got an aircraft that makes less noise than another one that's already certified. How about we do a couple of ground tests? What do you reckon? And he said, oh, I've never heard of that happening before. I'll tell you what, he was happy to fly out and do the testing for us. And he then sent us a quote. So no luck there. He was. We had one real huge win when I was talking to the company owners, and I said, it'd be great if we have, there's a advisory circular out there, tells you how to do your noise testing, how to flight test it, how to measure it. The equipment that's quite prescriptive. The equipment's got to have the right calibration certificates associated with it, various things. And the owners said, we know a guy, he does a bit of acoustic testing for us around airports. So it turned out we had an expert, and not only was an expert, but he had all the equipment. And he was like a noise expert. He was that sort of boffin you want. He's a guy who said, oh yeah, I've got equipment. And we said, yeah, is it calibrated? And we said, oh yeah, it is calibrated. I've got the certificates. And he then talked about the calibration equipment had to be calibrated. So he was exactly sort of our guy. So he was just an absolute gem. It turned out I'd been dealing with his father sort of 25 years ago as well. So, who would know? Acoustic engineering is like a hereditary thing, like beef farming. So that was a huge win for us, and we all said, well, okay, in that case, we might try and do that in country, in New Zealand. So there's a little bit of diagram how it works. You have this reference height. It's quite a prescriptive type test. You have this reference height, which is the height your aircraft would be if it adopts the normal procedures 2,500 metres from brakes off, if you're doing your normal takeoff. And that's where your noise is measured from. And then there's a bit of a calculation about what noise you've got to get under, but for an aircraft, because it varies with weight, for the 750XL2, that magic number is 88 dB. So you have that sort of magic point, a magic number. What they'll do during the flight test is they'll sort of whiz along above the runway, and they'll sort of swoop up at full power as if they're doing a takeoff, and they'll sort of do that circuit sort of 10, 12, 11 times and to get good data. Because what's quite tricky is to get the aircraft exactly the right spot height-wise, but also get it over the right box at the right spot all the time. And I should preface also noise testing. I have very little to do with it. I would have handed over to my colleague Carl Knight, who actually did the whole work. So hope no one's thinking here I'm taking credit for his work, because I actually said, hey, Carl, you look after this. Carl's now in the United States working for Mitsubishi and their latest jet. So this is all his good stuff. But so what we did, and we were lucky that NZ Skydive were sort of pretty cooperative on that. We did quite a few rehearsals. We did rehearsals with the aircraft, we did rehearsals with the pilot. Practicing, we also did rehearsals with the expert. And we did about 3 of those. There's some, they would talk about our acoustic experts. We did 3 of those with our expert. You have things like a little disc, you have to have shaved grass. And as you see there, we got down to 84 dB, so we were about 3 dB less than what the existing aircraft was. But we did all these rehearsals before the CAA turned up, and that was just money and time so well spent. The civil aviation people, Glenn and Kavita, when they turned up, it was almost like a scripted. Everybody, there was a big team, they all knew what to do, they did it, it worked, and everything sort of came together. So there's just a little bit of a picture of it. There's that funny little frame thing. So that's where the aeroplane's got to fly over, and they actually take photographs and they measure the pixels of the photograph to determine whether the aircraft's the right height or not. Outstanding in their field, CAA absolutely outstanding in their field. There you can see them slightly to the right, keeping a close eye on things. Unbelievably buggy that day. It was like bug time. So they're possibly outstudying in their field, getting bitten to death. Now I just wanted to have a wee mention about civil aviation. We're working with them. Kavita's not here, so I was going to give her a huge shout out. Absolutely fantastic. When this project started, it was sort of just at the end of COVID. Everybody was still staying at home. It was quite hard. I had a hard job to get civil aviation people out of their houses, up to see the aircraft. At that stage, everybody around the country was sort of quite insular. It took a while for it all to sort of click into gear, but it just got better and better and better. You can see Kavita there. She's obviously made a pretty good joke because everybody thinks it's pretty hilarious. You can see Carl there at the end with his hat on. He thinks it's pretty funny. If you look at my face, I've got a bit of a forced grin. I think possibly the joke was at my expense. But which was just really so impressive was how Kavita and Carl were working together at that sort of project management level. So the system worked, and it worked really, really well. And so we got a type certificate in July 2023, and so that's a new model 750XL2 that sort of appeared. At the time, we had a bit of a financial bonus coming our way, so when it arrived, I was pretty excited. So sort of running a little bit parallel to that, we have one of our own STCs, which is on that same aircraft, which is called the Falco, which is an agricultural version of the 750XL. And running parallel to that, we actually put that same engine in the front of that ag aircraft. So in the same way that the standard category NZ skydive aircraft is really good for skydiving, gets up to height really well. There's also real return operationally for the ag aircraft, especially when it gets real hot and a bit windy in the middle of the day. It's still able to lift its big load. So part and parcel of that there was an agreement between Andy Stevenson Aviation, who own the aircraft, and NZ Skydive to have sort of data sharing and set sharing. So they wrote a letter. So it was something I was really extremely happy with. A little bit of that cooperation. Let's all share a little bit of risk, do a little bit of the work, and work together. So I'm just waiting on Glenn Somerville to finish that STC for me. Glenn, see, it's not going to happen today, is it? I guess if you're here, but that's. I think it's just been terrific that on the, that two different parties are sort of working together, sort of contributing where they do. A little bit of that sort of New Zealand Inc. Type system. And if this runs right. And that's it really. I showed that same, that video is not really relevant to Superpack. It's more just, I think it's a good video. When I gave the talk to the engineering at Waikato University, I just pointed out, you can just see the guy on the right-hand side, you can just see his clipboard and his headset. And I said, that's one of our young graduates. That's what he gets to do. He got to sit through that. And he thought it was pretty cool. Anyway, that's all my notes. That's the end of my talk. So, any questions or applause, Dave Moody?